to Her Huntress's art studio. So I've had a few requests on social media to do a little tutorial on this guy right here. This is my Hydrangea Alcohol Ink painting. Oops, let me hit myself in the head. But yeah, if my studio lights are washing it out, I'm going to insert a picture right here for you. But yeah, I've had some requests to do a tutorial on it, and I'm going to be going over some of the materials you're going to need to do this. So let's jump right into it, shall we? Let's go over some of the materials you're going to need to do this painting. First off, very important, you're going to need some kind of alcoholic beverage, adult alcoholic beverage, to put you in the mood to do art. Today I'm going to be drinking the Eastciders Spice Cider. It's very good. Now that the most important material is out of the way, you're going to need a piece of substrate. I'm using Yupo paper, 5x7. I'm going to do this one a little smaller than the original, but I'm using the Legion Yupo medium. You're going to need some alcohol. I'm using the 99% isopropyl alcohol. I have this in a little spray bottle. I'm also going to have some in a pen. And I also am going to be putting some in my little silicone cups to dip my brush into. The brush I will be using is just a simple Princeton art brush, number 2, round. Any nice little round brush that you like to use will do. Okay, the alcohol ink that I'm going to be using in its original form, for the background, I'm going to be using Lemon from Marabu, Ocher from Kielty Ink. I'm going to be dropping in some blues as a background for where our flowers are going to be. Kielty Ink Blue and Ranger Eggplant. Now, I also work from a dry alcohol ink palette. I have a whole bunch of these little paint palettes that I have dropped inks into and labeled them. The inks I'll be using from these pre-made palettes is Kielty Ink Slate, Kielty Ink Blue. This is the Marabu Caribbean. Now for our leaves and stems, I'm going to be using Kielty Bottled Green, Kielty Forest Green, and Brea Reese Olive Green. Okay, so, and some of the last items I'm going to be using, these are mainly to be putting in details on the leaves and little shadows or highlights. We have a periwinkle colored Sharpie. These are off-brand Copic markers from Firefly. This is Prussian Blue, Cool Gray. I have a colorless blender. And this is just like a little jelly roll, white jelly roll, that I will be putting in highlights with. Okay, time to work on the background. I'm taking a couple of drops of that lemon, 1 drop of the Kielty Ocher. It's pretty potent, it's only 1 drop. And I'm thinning that down with some alcohol. Now I'm spraying my background with a little alcohol, so it has some movement to it when I put this down. I'm working in the background with this Waterbrush, which I have filled with alcohol. I chose this way because I think it's just a little more interesting than using a sponge or a piece of felt to apply the background. It's really personal choice. That's just a embosser gun. I'm giving it a little dry before I add another layer to make it darker. And that's all I'm doing. I'm just adding layers to my background. I don't want the background really dark, just a little something something. Now you see these little darker spots forming as this is drying. I'm going back in when it's almost dry and blending these out. I don't want these harsh dots. So I'm taking my little alcohol brush, smoothing them out. I'm leaving the small ones for just something interesting to look at, But that's all I'm doing. I'm going in and making these dots blended. Okay, here's our finished paper. Now let's start on these flower balls. I am mixing 1 drop of Kielty blue, thinning it down with alcohol. Next, I'm quickly mapping out where I want these hydrangea balls to go. I'm taking a Kleenex with some alcohol on it and cleaning the spot. Now, if your hydrangeas have some green to them, you don't have to take off the yellow color because it's going to mix with the blue and give it some green in there, which will work out nicely. The picture I'm working from happens to not have any green, so I'm taking the yellow off. And I'm just building up a little bit of colors. There's shadows in these balls, so I'm working the color in, making layers, making some more dark, giving it a quick dry. And if I didn't say, I took that eggplant color right on the tip of my alcohol brush and laid down some purple there, because one of these has a little bit more purple to the top of it. And I'm just going back in with the alcohol brush and making these little dots more blended, and really that's all I'm doing. And then I'm going to let this portion dry really good till we start in the next. I also wanted to add it's helpful to get a reference photo when you're doing still lifes. My original is on the left, the still life was on the right. It's just really helpful. I'm kind of winging this one a little bit since I've done hydrangeas before. I kind of know what they look like, but I would suggest always have a reference photo no matter what you're doing. All right, the Sharpie. This is the periwinkle colored Sharpie. What I'm doing is I'm going in and drawing individual leaves, so I kind of have a game plan when I put some more colors down. Now, these look intricate, but they're really not. I'm just putting in some general flower leaf shapes. Hydrangeas seem to have 4. So I'm just really putting them in. I'm doing a couple very nice shaped ones here and there, and then other than that, I'm just filling in with little flower shapes to give myself a reference of where I'm going to put some color. Now I'm taking that darker blue and I'm putting in some shadows. The hydrangea ball really has some dark contrast behind the flowers, so I wanted to put that in right away to give myself kind of a map. Now I am hydrating my little dry palette, and we're going to start coloring in this flower. I'm taking my blue, and I don't know if the dry ink is a popular technique, but Sharon AK Harris, and I will try to link her channel down below, she is really good at doing these palette alcohol ink still lifes. I've watched her quite a bit and learned a lot, so I would suggest if you're going to do anything like this to check her channel out and get some tips. But yeah, so I'm just taking that ink on my brush, not a whole lot, not a whole lot of alcohol because it'll balloon out if you don't watch it. So I just have a little bit of color on my brush to fill in these petals. Taking that lighter, more tealy blue color. And really at this point, I'm just putting some color into the flower. I'm not being particular. I'm just throwing some color down in these petals. And I'm gonna blend them out a little better later. I'm just getting the basic colors where I want them in this step. And looky there, I made a mistake and my ink was too dark. That's okay, you can fix it later. Like I said, I just took more ink from that spot, blended it out other places in my flower. If you make a mistake, don't freak out. Alcohol ink, it's actually pretty forgiving at some points. Like you've seen there, I made it way too dark, so it's easy to lighten up. And this is where I'm just taking alcohol now on my brush, not a whole lot. My brush is just barely damp, and as you can see, I take the tip of it off onto the paper towel, and I'm going into the individual petals and blending that. So I'm smoothing them out. The first step, I just put the color down, get it all in the flower. Now I'm taking a little bit of the alcohol straight and making things look a little more smooth. Time to go in with a little darker shadow. This really makes your petals pop. I noticed in my pictures of hydrangeas, there are a lot of really dark, interesting shadows in one of the hydrangea balls. So I'm going in, making some interest, making some of the petals pop out. And I'm not using a reference for this, so I'm really just kind of putting in some random things. And you have spots that the petals are missing on the outside, so you see little chunks of shadow, just to make it interesting. So I'm just finishing out, putting some extra touches in here, some extra color, blending, making the little spots darker. I'm a messer, so if I could, I'd go back and forth and mess with this all day. But for this video's sake, I'm gonna wrap up this flower. All right, now that blender, this is just a colorless blender, and I'm using it here to actually lift color off. So you see I'm going in, rubbing it around, rubbing the tip in the paper towel, getting the color off. Going back in, lifting up color, rubbing the alcohol ink off on the paper towel. So this is how I go back in to make highlights after I have color down. Because that's a challenge with alcohol ink, is adding highlights after the fact. I know that's what you can use paint pens and that gel pen, which I use, but I find this technique pretty helpful. And since I'm using Yellow paper, it doesn't get all the way white, which is fine because the petals that I was looking at aren't white, they're just a lighter blue, so this works out perfect. You could also use a Q-tip, a little blending stub with a little alcohol on it. Just make sure whatever you're using isn't saturated and it's just barely damp. I didn't feel I had enough shadow in there, so obviously I went back in to mess. More messing. And as you can see, I'm not really particular. I mean, anybody can do this, guys. I'm just going in with some basic shapes and throwing color in, making petals look a little round. Now on this second flower ball, I'm making it a little darker because it's in the shadow to the first a little bit, and I'm adding some purples in here. So the whole ball itself is a darker color, darker tone than the first blue one I did. What I just added in the middle is fresh eggplant to color these in. I wish I had, I don't know why I didn't have eggplant dry to go for my palette, and I struggled getting the color on this flower just right, because I would have preferred my eggplant color to have been dry. So I'm going in with fresh ink, and I'm struggling a little bit. But hey, it happens. You find a way around it, and I did. Just adding that purple color to the top. And I'm adding the color first instead of some of the shadows, because that ink is really fresh and I'm waiting for it to evaporate a little bit before I go in with some purple shadows. I know Tim Holtz makes a alcohol ink palette that has a whole bunch of little wells in it. Someday I'll probably buy that, but for now I use these little ones because I can just set out a little tray of 6 at a time and not have this whole palette of like 24 colors sitting next to me. So for now, this is how I like to do it. Adding in some darker petals towards the bottom. More of the same. I'm throwing in some color, blending them out with some alcohol ink, some alcohol. Just be sure when you're doing this kind of technique, don't have your brush too wet with alcohol because it'll bloom out. Now you can fix it if you make a mistake, of course, but now I'm making the shadow between the flowers a little more prominent. And now I'm going back in and adding some of those shadows, distinguishing the petals. And you could have left it as is. I mean, it looked like a hydrangea before, just a very soft one. And it looks like I'm being all precise, but I'm really not. I mean, I'm just outlining, making things look darker, playing, throwing more color on it until it looks somewhat decent. It looks like a hard painting to do, but it really wasn't. If you can control your alcohol ink in this dry ink technique, then you've got it made. Going in again with that colorless blender, making some highlights. Again, you could use a Q-tip here. Just dab the tip in some alcohol. Okay, continuing on, finally, I'm going to sketch in some leaves. They have jagged edges. I just wanted to have something down when I went in with some color. Now this is the Reese olive, I believe. Throwing some color down at first, and then we're going to go back in with some more details. So I'm using that darker green, getting the tip since it's slightly curving down. You don't know it now, but the bowl that these are in is round, so this leaf is actually rounding the bowl a little bit. Trying to make that leaf look more 3D. Putting some shadows in where it touches the flower. Blend, blend, blend. And if you don't have a good blend, just go in with your brush with a tiny bit of alcohol on it and blend just like you would any other paint. If you don't have a lot of alcohol in your brush, it'll blend just fine. More of the same for this leaf. Now these leaves have a stem vein going through them that's much lighter than the leaf, which we're going to add that later on with a gel pen. And I waited till that flower was dry before I went in with doing stuff close to it with this leaf. Just blend, blend, blend. Trying to make it look somewhat like a leaf. Okay, here, it's hard to make vases freehand, so I have this little pattern. It's just a round circle, and I cut off the bottom for the base. No matter how perfect I try to get it, it's always crooked, so there's that. This is just a Kleenex with a little bit of alcohol on it. Barely any alcohol. I'm rubbing off that yellow we put down as the background. Now I get pretty particular in here, trying to get it off and away from the leaf. Really, you don't have to because you're going to put a shadow in later. So you don't have to get crazy with this if you're recreating this. Sometimes you just get going with it and kind of forget what you're doing. And it's okay to leave some of the color because you'd see some of it through this glass anyway. So I get a little crazy here, but it's not necessary. Okay, I forgot to add this in the materials, but this is a dry palette. This is just gray. Going in with just a tiny bit of color on my brush, mostly alcohol. And that graphite I put down actually blends into the alcohol pretty nicely. And we're just making this bowl look round. There wasn't much color in this glass bowl that was holding these flowers. So this part's a little boring, but if you don't get it right, it does look off. So now I'm just putting in the bottom. And since it's rounded, you have to put that in or it looks weird. You can kind of see the other side a little bit. Okay, now I can see a leaf through the other side. And in the picture I was looking at, it looked lighter than the leaves in the front, which in my mind was odd. I did it that way, but I think I should have made that leaf darker since it was in the background through the bowl. But whatever. Okay, so now I'm just using that as a guide to try to get a straight water line. The water line was very faint, but you could see it. And don't forget to round it up at the side since the bowl is round. And then you could also see very faintly the water line on the other side of the container. That's what we're putting in there. And round that water line down since it's in a round container. Right now for the stems, that's actually some of that ochre from the beginning. And I'm sorry guys, I'm not the best at making tutorials and my hand's in your way. But the main thing here is that stem comes down where it meets the water line. When you look through water, the stem is actually in a different place. So you want to make sure that your stem is off a little bit from the top. Same going the other way. Now, it really depends on where your stem is positioned, but since it's going to the side like this, you can tell if you're looking through water that where it hits the water line and begins again when you're looking through it is in a different spot. So that's the main thing when you're doing stems in water. I'm just putting in some doodads and some interest on those stems. You could see where they hit the water a little bit, so I put a little shadow there. Okay, time to play with this gel pen. I'm just putting in some white highlights here and there. Really no rhyme or reason, just where the light petals were from before. Now this particular pen doesn't stay white when it dries. It kind of absorbs the ink around it, so I'm getting a light blue and a light purple, which is kind of nice, no stark whiteness. When you first put it down, it looks really white and weird, but then after it dries, it kind of blends in a little better. Putting those stems in those leaves. And now I'm just putting in some interest here and there. I'm taking that alcohol ink marker and making some shadows where the leaves are near our flowers. Last step, you can see a little bit of shadow where these leaves are touching the bowl on the outside. Can't see it real well through the video, but in real life you can see the shadows I'm putting in, and I went outside the line, of course, so I'm cleaning it up with that colorless blender. I'm just making a little shadow from the bowl. And that's about it, folks. Well, thank you for joining me today while I did this alcohol ink painting for you. If you like these kind of videos, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in my next video, guys. Bye!